Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologize for the delays on our stream for the last week. Unfortunately, I was forced to deal with, some outsiders who tried to take control of the asylum. Sadly, only one of them survived the encounter. I was so much hoping to be able to add to my patient count, but, it was their choice. Hopefully, I won't have any other issues preventing stories for this evening or any other night in the near future. Tonight's stories are from some of your favorite authors that I have read from before. I do hope you enjoy the stories tonight, but honestly, I don't care, because I have you in my hands during visitation hours, and you will just have to endure. You may have been brought here against your will, or you may have voluntarily committed yourself, but while you are here, allow me to entertain you. You certainly can't leave, at least for now. While you are here, allow me to introduce myself. I am Beyond 5150, the head inpatient of this asylum, and I will be your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your master of the macabre, your purveyor of the petrifying. I am your god of all things terrifying. I will tell you stories you will wish you had never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place here, so welcome your current circumstances and just accept the hair rising on your neck, your chills and goosebumps. Oh, and there is no milk and cookies. Now, sit back, relax, and wait for the doctor to call you back. This evening, I have selected some of your more favorite authors, at least. So we'll be doing a nice blend of them this evening. Let's see who's here tonight. Okay, we have Carnage, we have Casey, and Josie's here. Oh, and then there's Dustin. Welcome, everyone, this evening. So, tonight's first story is going to be written by Verastahl. As I've said before, all the information for all the authors that we read this evening, or any other evening, is listed in the description. So please feel free to say hello to the authors that you enjoy and give them all the wonderful, horrible things you can think of, because he must join us. No. To be honest, I would love it if you would tell these authors what a good job they are doing. The information is also listed in the description. Oh, it seems that we have Riv and Chris as well here. Welcome. So, first story this evening is titled Monster of Memory by Verastahl. There is music in my heart. My best friend, Terry, died 3 months ago. I did the things a best friend does. I spoke at the funeral. I comforted his family. I helped his fiancée, Hannah, pack up his things. Terry had been a constant in my life since junior high, despite all the obstacles that are usually erode a 20-year friendship like time and distance. We came from vastly different backgrounds from the start. I was from a small working-class household, while he grew up in a large family, so wealthy that money wasn't even really a consideration for them. It was just like a given, like water or air. Yet, Growing up, his parents were always kind and welcoming to me. And while I was never close to Terry's brother and two sisters, they were never stuck up or mean. When I stayed with them during the funeral in the following few days, they were just as I remembered. I could tell they appreciated having another person there that loved Terry and could share the burden of losing him so suddenly. Still, he was my only real connection to that family and their lives. And when I flew back home the following week, I had no expectation I would ever have much contact with them again. That's why I was surprised when, a few days later, I got a call from Hannah. She told me Terry had brought me a gift before he died. A very unique kind of service that they had both used before and really loved. He had wanted it to be a surprise for the next time we were together, but now that it wasn't possible. So she wanted to let me know. I was strangely touched by both the gift and her thinking to call and tell me about it. It sounded like something Terry would do. Wiping my eyes, I asked her what kind of service it was. She gave a short laugh and said it would be better if it was just a surprise, that the people would be contacting me in the next few days to set up an appointment and everything would be explained then. And with that, she said her goodbyes and was gone. The following Friday, I was sitting in my living room across from a distinguished-looking man in a well-tailored suit. His vaguely European accent added a pleasantly cultured lilt to his words as he told me about his company, Munonica. He said his name was Dmitry Aller, and he had a very special gift for me. Andrew, if I offered you the chance to take a wonderful trip to anywhere in the world, a true adventure full of beauty and excitement, wouldn't you want to go? I gave a slight smile. Well, yeah, sure, yeah. Was that the gift? A trip to wherever I wanted? The man returned my smile briefly as he nodded. Of course you would know. But now, what if I told you that after you took that trip, you would have no memory of it at all? You would have no trace of it having happened in your life whatsoever. I frowned. What was this? I don't know. I don't think I would, no. The man's expression turned to a contemplative frown. Why is that? Shrugging, I paused for a moment as I tried to find the right words. I don't know what the point would be. I would just be losing time from my life and having nothing to show for it when it was done. Aller raised a finger. Exactly. We are, in many ways, our memories. Things that happened that we don't know about or don't remember. Well, they are of little power or value to us. Would you agree? Yeah, I guess so. Nodding, he went on. Well then, would you also agree that the opposite is true? That memories of things that did not occur can be very powerful and of great worth? I felt a growing unease at this. The man, while very polished and pleasant, was making little sense. I almost felt like I was being given a sales pitch for a self-help seminar or a fancy cult. Hoping I didn't sound rude, I asked him exactly what he was offering. Far from looking insulted, the man's face brightened as he leaned forward. I'm offering you, or rather your friend, Terry, is offering you, the gift of memory. We have developed a method of permanently implanting knowledge and memories inside a human brain. I know it sounds like science fiction, but I assure you, it is not. Our research and technologies is 30 years ahead of what is commonly known or available because we have the support of a small but very powerful clientele that can afford to pay us substantial sums for such advancement. I shook my head. How is that possible? It sounds like something out of the Matrix. He chuckled. Or Total Recall. Believe me, I've heard them all, but there is nothing so fantastical as all of that. Essentially, we have perfected a technique by which we could induce dreamlike state in a subject. During this period, we can then induce very specific memories to the brain. You know, some dreams seem very real and stay with you after you wake. It is akin to that, although much more detailed and resilient. Your sleeping brain will think it is a dream, and when you wake, it will be recalled as real past events. Swallowing, I weighed his words. I had trouble believing it was true, but even if it was, I wasn't going to trust someone to mess with my memories. On the other hand, Hannah said that she and Terry had both done it, and I knew he'd never have gotten it for me as a gift if he didn't believe it was safe. I had the worried thought that it seemed strange that he had never mentioned it to me before, but possibly that was just so it wouldn't ruin the surprise if he planned on getting me to try it in the future. Either way, I decided I could at least finish hearing the man out. So, what kind of things could be implanted? The man sat back in his chair and folded his hands across his knee, looking distant as he began again. Oh, all the things you might expect. Wondrous vacations, exciting adventures, illicit romances. He shot me a sly look at the last. Of course, it cannot be anything too fantastical, or the brain won't accept it as reality. So, no trips to Mars or having superpowers, I'm afraid. And those things are beyond the scope of what you're being offered in any case. We have 3 tiers of service. Tier 1 is the least expensive and is where everyone has to start. It is what we call the knowledge tree. What's that mean? Have you ever wanted to know how to build a car engine, or fly a plane, or play the piano? Tier 1 will give you professional level of knowledge in one subject area. Something that would normally take years of dedication will be learned in less than 1 day. My eyes widened. Are you serious? Aller smiled again. Oh, very much so. You'll still have to train the muscle memory, of course, but that usually takes a few hours of practice at the most. It will be like you are an expert, turning to a well-known skill after being away from it for a year or two, and you will keep it forever. I was starting to be excited in spite of myself, but I thought back on something else he had said. Why do you say everyone starts at Tier 1? Well, for 2 reasons. First, the human brain is very adaptive, but we find the greatest success by starting with something relatively small. As strange as it sounds, it is much easier to teach you how to be a tennis pro or an excellent computer programmer than it is to give you a week-long adventure as a deep-cover secret agent. The brain accepts the core information easily, but the experiences themselves are trickier. But with Tier 1, we're merely giving you what you what we call filler experiences. You on a tennis court or sitting at a computer in the bare room. Just enough memory of learning the skill that your brain accepts it as reality and does not experience any mnemonic dissonance. After a brain has experienced the technique, it is much more accepting of more elaborate realities, and other tiers become an option. Okay, I guess that makes sense, but what's the second reason? Aller chuckled again. Why, the money-back guarantee, of course. If you are not completely satisfied with your Tier 1 experience, you will get a full refund of the money your friend paid for. I gave a nervous laugh. What's to stop me from liking the treatment and still asking for a refund? Aller gave a slight smirk. Well, that's your prerogative, of course. Normally our clientele is not concerned with how much it costs or getting the money back. He glanced around my apartment. But I understand not everyone is in the same financial position. Rest assured, if you complete Tier 1 and want a refund, we will get it. No questions asked. My head was buzzing as I asked the next question. How much money did Terry spend on this? The man shrugged lightly. I believe it was $600,000. And it's wondrous when it sings. The following week, I was in a coldly beautiful clinic in rural Iceland. The flight and accommodations were part of the service, I learned, and as I was ushered to my room, I found myself amazed by my surroundings. Everything was so white and clean, but more than that, I almost felt like I was on a spaceship from the time I stepped into the lobby of what could have just as easily been an exclusive, ultra-modern hotel. Soft light emanated from the walls and ceilings, and nearly everything seemed to be seamlessly automated and voice-controlled. Ambient music played quietly in most of the halls, and underneath that, the almost inaudible hum of something that vibrated the air like a distant heartbeat. Over the next day, I was treated to a wonderful food and strange but comfortable surroundings. The next afternoon, it was time for the treatment. I was taken into a room with a large padded chair, and while I saw several machines and banks of electronics along one wall, I had really no idea how any of it worked. I had been assured that the treatment required no surgery or physical implant, but simply amounted to the right combination of chemicals and manipulation of electromagnetic fields. I was strapped down, but they said that was only to keep me still in case of a mild muscle contractions. Several people clad in white made preparations around the room while I was given multiple injections. And within a minute, I felt myself beginning to fade out. I felt at last a moment of dim panic and found myself focusing on a dark spot on the otherwise pristine far wall and willing myself to stay awake and see what they were actually doing to me. I knew the thought made no sense, and within moments I was waking up back in my room. I looked at the clock and saw that actually 6 hours had passed. And then it was then I saw the guitar propped against the far wall. I picked up learning the guitar for both sentimental and practical reasons. Terry and I always talked about learning to play, but I could never afford lessons, and I always suspected he avoided learning because he understood that and knew I wouldn't accept help from him either. I also thought guitar was a good idea because it was relatively small addition to my brain if it worked, and easier to argue for a refund if it didn't, assuming they were being honest. I sat up and then stood slowly, gingerly testing my feet as I stepped forward toward the instrument. I felt fine. More than fine. I felt better. And I knew as soon as I touched the guitar that I'd be able to play it. Within 2 hours, I'd come close to matching what my head already knew. I played songs of all kinds as easy as breathing. Tears of wonder in my eyes as I strummed the guitar. I could have never had imagined ever been given such a gift, and when I finally slept, it was the best sleep of my life. I woke with a start to find Mr. Aller sitting at the foot of my bed. When he turned to look at me, his face was unreadable. Good morning. What are you doing here? He glanced down at his hands. Well, there's a small accounting matter we must attend to. Accounting? He puffed out a discontented breath. Yes. When your friend procured this gift for you, we placed a customary hold on his bank account in the amount of $600,000. The sum was not yet withdrawn at the time, as we did not withdraw payment until services rendered. Clearing his throat, he went on. Yet, when we went to withdraw payment this morning, we learned that the account has been closed. We contacted the banker as a courtesy and were informed the account was set up as a limited trust that was liquidated upon Terrence's death. I felt my mouth go dry as cotton. What does that mean? Aller's eyes were hard when he turned back to me. It means you owe us the money, of course. I let out a burst of nervous laughter. I can't pay that. I can't afford a new car, much less this. I gestured toward the guitar laying next to me in the bed before looking back at him. You have to know that. The man's lips twisted slightly. Nevertheless, we must be made whole. But we aren't unreasonable. You can either pay the sum owed in full, or, in the alternative, bring us 2 new clients of equal or greater value. One or the other within 1 week. I felt myself growing angry. Listen, I didn't ask for this. Your agreement isn't with me. I'll talk to Terry's family, but I can make no promises. And honestly, it's your problem more than mine. Mr. Allers let out a dry laugh. You think so, boy? Do you think we can only give you pleasant memories? Standing up, I began backing away in fear and frustration. You're insane. He stood and met my gaze steadily. Do you want to have the memories of a childhood where you were molested? Or perhaps the guilt of drowning a baby sister that never existed? He gave me a contemptuous last look as he walked past me towards the door. 1 week, then we come for you. And now we go to part 2. There's a worm living in my head. I was on a flight back to the U.S. that afternoon, but it took 2 days before I was able to track down Hannah. She had moved out of Terry's house after the funeral, the property apparently being absorbed into the family's wealth, much as his bank account had. Her new apartment back in her northeastern Northwestern hometown, was a big step down from the beachside mansion she had spent the last 3 years in. In fact, it reminded me a lot of my own place. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I fucked up. I fucked myself, and now I fucked you too, I guess. The girl sitting in front of me was a ghost of the Hannah I knew. She was cooperative enough. I'd half expected her to hang up on me when I finally got her on the phone. But she told me where she was living and agreed to meet. I was up there the next morning, and I had to work to hide my shock when I saw her. She looked like she had lost weight and hadn't bathed in days. Her hair hanging in greasy strings around her pale face, but worse, she looked like something inside her was missing, some spark. Maybe the will to live was either guttering or already gone. Sitting in Hannah's bare and dingy living room filled with boxes she hadn't bothered unpacking, I felt sympathy for her. It was being overridden by my fear and anger. Just tell me what happened. Who these people are, and how can I stop this? She let out a dull laugh, her eyes flickering to meet mine before falling away again. You can't stop this. Neither of us can. Trying to keep my voice even, I tried again. Just tell me. When I first met Terry, it was like a dream come true, you know? He was like a prince in some kind of fairy tale, coming to take away from my boring life and make a small-town Hannah his princess. I know that might sound like I was in it for the money, but that wasn't true. I didn't care if he was rich or poor, although I admit that in the beginning I liked the perks of being a girlfriend of someone who could go anywhere and do anything. Still, I came to hate the money over time. It tied him to his family, for one thing. First, I liked them. They were always nice and treated me well and didn't act stuck up or anything. But once I stuck around for a while, once they saw I might become a part of their family permanently, things started to change. It was the little things. They would talk about some expensive trip they took to some fancy place and then ask if I had ever been, knowing there was no way I had. They would talk about some obscure thing they learned in their Ivy League schools and then apologize to me. Tell me they were sorry and that they were happy to talk about something I was more familiar with. As though they were doing me a favor by lowering the conversation to my level. Passive-aggressive shit like that. Stuff that was small enough that I'd look insane and petty bringing it up to Terry. And at first I just laughed it off and tried to ignore it. But as I grew to love him more, I found myself caring more. Even though I knew it was stupid and I shouldn't care what they thought. I started becoming insecure. More awkward when we went out to a fancy place or on a nice trip. I started thinking I wasn't good enough for him. When he proposed to me, I panicked. I was in a bad place at the time with all of this stuff, and I almost turned it down. Told him he could do better. But I loved him too much for that, and to let his shit family psych me out or let my own weakness keep me from the man I love, so I said yes. Less than a month later, a friend from high school contacted me, told me about a clinic they had went to in Iceland. Bear in mind, when I knew this dude, he was huffing glue behind the bleachers and getting Cindy Palino pregnant. But apparently he had gone on to become a semi-successful real estate agent in Seattle. I didn't know why he was contacting me or telling me about this place, but he was a good enough salesman to keep me on the line. It was a place where they could give you new memories and knowledge. Totally safe and really amazing stuff like something from a sci-fi movie. They said they had very flexible financing and had actually done his treatment in exchange for an old speedboat he had for years. And that now, instead of sucking at the financial side of his business, he was able to handle complex accounting like he had been doing it for years. Long story short, I wound up doing it. Terry had given me a car for my birthday the year before, and I gave that to them. Made up a story to him about going to visit my sister and the car getting stolen while I was actually away at the clinic. In exchange, they gave me what they called their higher education and culture package. 2 weeks later, we were at a family dinner, and I was the one doing the apologizing and telling them that we could talk about something they knew more about. It was wonderful. A few days later, the man I first met from the clinic, Mr. Aller, contacted me. He said there had been problems with the trade, that the service I received was actually more expensive than the worth of the car. Instead of being worth $75,000, it was actually worth $3.2 million. I couldn't have any way of paying it. Even Terry would have trouble paying it without tons of questions from his family, as almost everything he had was controlled by the trust. I wasn't going to involve him or them in any way. I wasn't going to prove his family right by asking for money like that. So I argued with Aller, told him that it wasn't my mistake and the deal was a deal and he could fuck right off. He told me I had a month to reconsider and either pay the money or recruit someone else to take the treatment. I said sure thing and shut the door in his face, tried to forget about it, figuring he was full of shit. A month later they came for me. I don't remember much about it, but when it was done, I was sitting outside our house on the driveway. It was early morning and it was cold, but I barely noticed. I was too busy thinking about the 2 years I'd spent trapped in a basement being tortured when I was a teenager. The funny thing is, there's some part of me that knows it's not true, right? Like, especially with that first bad memory. They alter it a little, make everything seem a little off. In that first bad one, everything was red, like a camera with a red filter on it or something. And they do it on purpose. They call it tint marker, a way of letting you know it's something they added, and a way of making you understand it doesn't matter if you know they put it in you. It still hurts. I walked into the house expecting Terry to be terrified with worry. The love of his life had been abducted for several days, right? Except, no. He thought I'd gone on a sudden trip to visit my sister again, because apparently I had texted and called him about it. I don't remember any of that, of course, but I'm starting to get how little that really meant. Now I understand more. They don't care about the money. That's just a trick to make you think you're dealing with business, dealing with something normal you can fight against or bargain with. I think they do want the new customers, though I don't really know why. What I do know is what happened after I gave them to you. I hated to do it. I've always liked you, and Terry loved you like a brother. Hell, way more than he loved his actual family. But after he died so suddenly, I was broken and desperate. He left me alone for a while after that first bad memory, but then Mr. Aller contacted me again, telling me that my obligations were still not fulfilled. So I lied to you, tricked you into going. Probably damned myself by betraying you and the love Terry had for you. Next weekend, I woke up screaming, remembering how I was driving the car that killed my mother and father last year. I checked, and my father really did die last year. The records say he died of a heart attack while having surgery. There's no indication he was in a car wreck. There's also no indication that my mother died at all. See, I hadn't seen my mother since I was 6. She was a junkie. And when she started using around me, my dad threw her out. She could be dead for all I know, but I I don't have any other memories of her except for the night that I killed them both in that wreck. That's the trick of it, you see. I know logically the memory has to be false, has to be implanted, but my brain and my heart don't really believe that. The memory's too strong and feels too real. Especially without any of the tint markers the first one had. Felt like what I know has to be true, and what I know is true are two different things, and that difference is tearing me apart. The only thing I can suggest is running. They will probably still find you. They somehow found me, even though I was hiding out after setting you up, but it was worth a shot, I guess. I could tell from her weary expression that she knew it wasn't worth much at all. Why didn't you go to the police or something? Her mouth split into a terrible grin as she stared at me in disbelief. You don't think I tried? Why do you think you haven't called someone? Try it. They put all kinds of stuff inside you. You can't tell on them. She lowered her gaze again. You can't even kill yourself. My eyes widened. Hannah! You didn't. Shaking her head, she stood up. I thought she was done talking, but she paused before walking away. Before they're done with you, you'll try it too. And it tells me terrible things. I'd like to tell you I found some way to get the money or fight them. Some trick to outsmart them. But in the end, I ran. For all her past deceit, I knew Hannah had been telling me the truth, or at least the truth as she knew it to be. And I had no way of winning against something like that, so my only hope was that if I disappeared, they would leave me alone. 10 days after I learned to play the guitar, I learned I was the one that killed Terry. The memory was strange and slightly surreal, with everything tinted a deep blue, but despite this, it was very detailed and real to me. I remember calling him up and asking if it was okay if I visited him in a couple of days, but to keep it just between us, that I was coming. That I met him out in the parking lot of our old school, now closed and scheduled to be renovated into some kind of group home the following spring. I remember his confused laughter when I pulled the knife on him, and how he started to squeal and beg as it began to hurt him. I remembered it all, and I knew it was true, even though every bit of it was a lie. Because Terry had died of a sudden stroke while he was playing golf, and I was over 1,000 miles away. By the time Hannah had called me, he had already been declared dead in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Blue tint marker aside, there's no way I could have killed him. But despite that objective reality, I could feel the weight of murdering my best friend crushing me. No one even bothered contacting me again, either to shake me down for money they didn't really want, or for the new recruits that I had already decided I would never give them. I wouldn't make the mistake Hannah had made, dragging down someone else as I drowned in the sea of horror they were slowly pouring into my head. Maybe they somehow knew I wouldn't help them. Either way, 2 weeks later, I woke up in a strange hotel in Nebraska. And now I knew how I always loved torturing animals since I was a young boy, how excited it made me even now. I wanted to deny it, to say it went against everything I thought about myself and the other memories of my life, but I was beginning to appreciate how those little internal protests actually meant in the face of the thing poisoning my mind. Like Hannah, I tried repeatedly to tell someone, anyone, about what had happened, what was happening to me. But somehow I could never get the words out. Like she predicted, I tried to hang myself in the closet that That same time, in that same Nebraska motel room with a drying cord from the dirty bathroom, but my hands wouldn't cinch it around my neck. The following day, my feet similarly betrayed me, refusing to step out in front of a passing concrete truck. 3 days ago, I was taken again, although this time I actually remember some of it. I remember waking up to people surrounding me and in a low drone of the plane's engines while we were in flight. I remember being taken back to the clinic, not through the beautiful lobby, but through some dark service entrance that sent back the lonely echoes of our footfalls as I was pulled back inside. Yet even then, I was surprised how little I struggled, at how few noises I had made. I could still see and understand everything well enough by that point, having woken from whatever stupor they had induced, but I still found it hard to do much other than look around blandly while my insides felt like they were dissolving in an acid bath of terror. Then I was in the procedure room again, stripped naked and strapped to the chair, staring at that one blemish on the white wall. There were several people around me, but there was no show of giving me injections this time or scientific fanfare of any kind. I wanted to ask questions, but I found I couldn't even speak, and no one would even speak to me. So I was left staring at that dirty spot on the far wall. At first, I thought it was my imagination that was even growing larger, but no, it was. Or at least the white was disappearing as the wall slid away to reveal a black tunnel. Suddenly, Mr. Aller was beside the chair. He glanced down at me, his smile cold. "Welcome to Tier 3. Someone behind me began to roll the chair forward into the yawning darkness. I felt hot air that smelled of sulfur buffeting my face as we cleared the threshold of the room, leaving behind the clean precision of the modern clinic for the rough-hewn dark walls of volcanic rock that surrounded us on every side. There were 5 of us, including Aller, and the 3 attendants all had flashlights clipped to their shirts now. The jostled illumination dancing back and forth across the slowly deepening tunnel as we progressed further out and down. I wish I could say I don't remember any of this, but I do, at least for now. I also remember when the tunnel finally flattened out and widened into a stone chamber that seemed impossibly large. The walls to either side were only 10 or 12 feet away, but they seemed to run ahead of us upward forever, far higher than should be possible considering how deep I thought we must be. And the walls themselves were pocked with row after row of holes that appeared to be tunnels half the size of the one we had just left. I had the thought of a beehive, though I knew it was a bad comparison. I wasn't more afraid at that moment than I had ever been, more than I ever thought I could be. I found myself hoping I would just die from being afraid, but it was just me lying to myself again. I was gonna die. I could still be much more afraid. They turned and began to push me toward one of the smaller tunnels, and as we grew closer, I saw something moving in that deeper tunnel. I was so transfixed by trying to see what we were approaching that I almost didn't hear Aller talking to me again. Back in 1783, there were a series of volcanic eruptions near here. It lasted for 8 months, if you can believe it. Killed many people, you know. Famine and fluoride poisoning mainly, though some died of other causes. My eyes were still fixed on the indistinct shape coming closer, but I heard him chuckle. Many people call it Skafterkalder, A few of us know it meant much more than just fire and destruction. The chair had stopped moving now. I was able to make out dim outlines of the thing before us. Its sides appeared to be a deep, slick red that resembled a brightly colored slug. I had no way of knowing how large it was because its undulating length went back into the darkness without end. My eyes kept wanting to avoid looking at what I assumed was its head, a mass of hard, deeper crimson flesh and squid-like arms that ran through with jagged calcifications of black stone that endlessly dripped a thick, white fluid from the wounds the rocks had produced. As the first drop of that hit my bare skin, I felt my leg begin to go numb. This place, these wonderful beings, no one knows for sure if they were always here and just awoke during the eruption, or if their arrival actually caused Skaldfjordr. What we do know is that soon after the eruptions died down, the first of us discovered newly opened caves that led us to this blessed place. Ever since, we have helped them with their work and reaped the bounty of their wisdom. I felt the first tendrils of the thing climbing my body, touching my legs and growing almost gingerly as it made its way towards my head. I felt like I was going insane. Then I suddenly spoke, my voice calm as it uttered words not my own. What is their work? My head turned toward Adler, who was looking down at me with a smirk. Glad you asked. That's why with the study of human soul. I felt the tentacles of the creature coiling around my neck and head, holding me fast toward Adler as he went on. They want to see what it takes to shape a soul, to refine it or break it. Are they immutable, or can they be changed through experiences, ideas, different beliefs? Aller looked over at the thing above me with some mixture of love and admiration. In past centuries, these studies have taken many forms, but lately there has been a focus on the effect of convincing someone of a false past. Can you make a person better or worse by giving them memories that they had better or worse life than they actually had? Can you make a person more virtuous or depraved simply by making them believe they had been so in the past? He looked back to me. These are the questions we are working to answer. But there are many, many of these things, these beings, you see, and we are always running out of participants in our experiment. He frowned slightly. Before you think us unfair, we really do try to be even-handed. We have people that we make much happier by erasing bad memories and creating better replacements. It's just, well, there has to be a group that is pushed towards the darker extremes, and unfortunately for you, that's the lot you've drawn. I wanted to say more, but then the world went white, then red, and then dark. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. I remember several more things now, terrible things I can't even bring myself to write. Not that I think it will matter much longer anyway. You see, I've been looking back over what I've written, and I already don't remember most of it. I started writing this to create a record, but how much will it help me if I can't recall the truth of it, and no one else will believe me? I'm surprised I could even write it at all, but perhaps they knew the pointlessness of it, so they don't mind. I don't know. What I do know is I feel like I'm being dissolved, boiled away in a stew of false memories I can't discern and strange impulses I don't understand. But what will be left when the boiling is done? What will be the shape of my soul when they are done refining it? I only hope that if they find the monster they're looking for, there's not enough left of me to see it. And that'll be the end of that story. Let's see here. Just looking over the chat. If in case anyone new came. Oh, see, Andrew has joined. Welcome, Andrew. Know who anybody else? Doesn't look like anyone else new that I can see. All right, so I'm gonna have a drink, and then we're gonna start with the next story. This next story was written by RichardSaxon. Again, all of the information for all of our writers are down in the description, so please go ahead and check them out and tell them how good they are doing. This story is titled, "I Was Born to Suffer." My very first memory brings me back to when I was 3 years old. It consists of my mother trying to stay positive as she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Although I was far too young to understand the concept of death, the words, "You have 2 months left to live," will forever remain with me until the day I die. Most of the following months are nothing but a blur of hospital visits and my mother hunched over a toilet, sick from the chemotherapy. She was dry heaving and rapidly deteriorating into emaciated remnant of a former human being. At the end, she was too weak to even get out of bed, so they moved her to a hospice care facility, where she spent the rest of her days suffocating and suffering under the cold fluorescent lights. I remember crying a lot. The only parent in my life had been reduced to a frail, broken creature, too delirious to even recognize me. That's the final memory I have of our time together. But that's not the way she died. During her final days, I held her hand for hours on end, wishing for her to come back and take care of me. The world was big and scary. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone in it. I'm not sure what triggered it, nor do I know why such a curse would be bestowed upon a 3-year-old kid, but as I tightly gripped her hand, something happened between us. The air fell silent in anticipation. My hand felt as if it were on fire, and my mother arched her back from muscle spasms where she remained frozen, her hand tightly grabbing my own. Within seconds, her complexion turned from deathly pale to healthy pink color. The bags under her eyes all but vanished, and the skinny frame that carried her around somehow filled out. For the briefest of moments, her look seemed to change. She seemed perfectly healthy, but it had taken a toll on my young body. As my mother had healed before my eyes, the disease seemingly transferred to myself, bubbling up to the surface in the shape of blisters and sores on my skin. I'd not contracted the cancer, but I had taken her pain away. Before either of us could figure out what had happened, I passed out on the floor of the clinic. The doctors were quick to do a full diagnostic screening of my mother. All the while, I was in a coma. Despite it all, I had healed quickly, but weeks would pass before I would finally regain consciousness. While I slept, my mother had endured an overabundance of scans and biopsies. The results were devastating. Even with her appearing absolutely healthy, she was still riddled with tumors. While her suffering had disappeared, the prognosis hadn't changed at the least. A couple weeks later, my mother succumbed to her illness, and I was left all alone in the world. It didn't take long before the secret came out into the open. The rumors appeared in the papers. The miracle child, they called me, or the angel of life. Thinking back, it's painfully ironic name considering I hadn't actually saved anyone, and death had still come marching despite what the stories told of my allegedly heroic efforts. No sooner had they buried my mother before they put me in a foster home. One for children with special needs and disabilities, not that I required anything they could offer. But they housed quite a few dying orphans, and they foolishly believed that I could help cure them. For days on end, they would ask and pry about the events surrounding my mother's death, but I was too young and not in control of my mystical abilities. I had been on the brink of death myself. Once they somewhat figured out how my powers worked, I would sit in the clinic holding the hands of sickly children. It only worked in terminal cases, as they quickly realized, and it didn't work as a cure. Each time I came into physical contact with someone close to death, they would miraculously heal. But only from the outside perspective. They would appear healthy, but were still just as sick as they had been moments before. All I could do was transfer the pain and suffering to myself, experience the horrors of their disease, and let them pass peacefully. But each time I used my powers, I would fall unconscious. First for weeks, then days, and after a while I could completely recover in about 12 hours. A few years went by like that. The carers desperately trying to figure out how I worked as they waited for my powers to evolve. Still, I was a child that had grown up not knowing anything but suffering. For every day that passed and another child died, I could see disappointment in their eyes. I wasn't the savior they had waited for. On one particular day after I had turned 12, a man showed up at the children's home. He was middle-aged and dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. The carers immediately fell in love with this charming facade. He appeared as a great wealthy man, and he had come to adopt a child, but not just any child. He wanted me. He smiled at me, made me feel safe for the short first visit, asking peculiar questions for the entirety of his stay. It didn't take long, even for my immature brain, to realize that he too wished to take advantage of my power, and like with everyone else, I expected him to use me as a tool, and nothing more. After offering a significant sum, the orphanage agreed to put me up for adoption officially. For the years I had stayed there, we were no closer to finding out how my powers worked, and they had little faith I could ever do more than take away people's pain. Death is death, with or without the pain, I could hear them say amongst themselves. They could probably do more with the money he offered than with my analgesic abilities. If you come with me, We can help people together, he said with love in his words, promising the best of intentions. His name was Peter. Simple enough. He told me last names were unimportant and served little more than to help the government put us on paper, categorizing us what they had no business getting involved with. There's not really any way of talking around it. Peter was a con artist, a medicine man, a faith healer, whatever he wanted to call him, and a damn good one at that. With me by his side, he would be able to gather more riches than he ever dreamed of. Quickly, after my adoption, he started offering people a cure for anything from sepsis to cancer, and after hearing about the miracles the papers claimed I could perform, people were quick to line up and pay extraordinary amounts just to get a chance to meet them. "We're giving them hope," he would say. "We'll take away their pain." Of course, seeing as people wouldn't survive longer even after having me drain their symptoms, we promised to cure people, give them their life back. In return, they gave us their life savings. Some clients even go as far as rejecting proper medical care in order to pay us. One client every other day would be all we accepted. Just enough time for me to heal in between sessions. I would suffer their pain over and over, never having more than a few hours or maybe a day of relief. "At least you won't die. Do you really want these people to suffer for their remaining few weeks?" Peter said. For years, I stayed by his side. I never had a real father figure, barely any parental figure at that, so with some cognitive dissonance, I tricked myself into believing he actually cared about these people and about me. I was nothing but a stupid child lost in the world, never having a friend nor any family to protect me. I was stupid. We would never stay in the same place for more than a month or two before our clients started falling over dead. After all, we had promised them a cure, but it was all a ruse. And as they saw the truth for themselves, we were left with whichever city we resided in. We traveled cross-country by train, bus, and rented cars from sketchy dealers, anything that could go relatively hidden under the radar. As we boarded trains, I would glance over at families, friends, and lovers embracing each other to welcome them or saying goodbye. I knew I would never experience these emotions. I hadn't that far, yet I longed for it. To love is not something you learn. It's an intrinsic human emotion, and without it, life just seems a little bit gray. My life went by, dragging me along without ever being known, loved, or missed. By the age of 18, you could name any terminal disease, and I could tell you I'd seen it. Hopeless cases of people so near death that they could barely classify as human beings anymore. Emaciated, skeletal figures walked into Peter's mobile clinic, dreaming about a cure. Of course, he promised that and more. As I got older, I started to see through his facade. I suspected the lies would catch up with us eventually, but he would manipulate the truth with lies of good intentions, just like he had the day we met. "We're giving them peace and hope. Is that truly such a horrible thing?" is what he told me. And I foolishly believed him for far too long. Time went by, and the sessions became more intense. I couldn't handle my ability better, but take more pain without falling unconscious, but with increasing demands, I simply couldn't keep up. As we had started I dealt only with 2 or 3 patients a week, but Peter started getting greedier, increasing the numbers to 1 session a day. The pain piled itself up onto each other for each new client, and day by day I got weaker. One client was an elderly woman dying from lung cancer. Perfect reward for years of smoking. The cancer drained from her pale face as it connected to me by an intravenous line. Her complexion improving by the second, and her face, once contorted with pain, turned to one with relief. Blisters formed on my skin, my nose and ears started to bleed. Moments later, I turned into a complete mess, riddled with the diseases of other people, but the client was satisfied, thinking she had just found the miracle cure she so desperately sought after. After the session, I went to lay down on my bed, but there would be no time to rest as Peter barged in, demanding I get ready for our next client. I could barely move, let alone deal with another person's illness. I just shook my head, and in response, Peter hoisted me off the bed and angrily shouted at me to stop being a whiny bitch. He'd always been like that, but that was the first time I truly understood that I was nothing more than a tool to him. The veil of his lies had finally fallen off. 18 years in this God-forsaken planet, without a friend, without a family, all alone, created just to suffer. Peter wanted me to do more sessions, gesturing to his absolutely packed appointment book. Are you really going to deny their pleas for help? Besides, how else are we going to pay for your private teachers without money? He dragged me into the room with our next customer, putting on his friendly facade just as we entered the room. He spoke with such caring words, giving off the appearance of genuine concern for the client. As always, he required the payment before any treatment took place. The client had been accompanied by what I assume was her mother, but she herself was a young, bald lady dressed in pants and a shirt that seemed either a size too small or a size too big. An odd mixture of what I assumed to be second-hand clothes. She was so sickly and small. I could tell she used to be quite pretty. Something remained in her eyes, a glimpse of something beautiful, not yet destroyed by disease. Together, they scrounged up a pile of crumpled notes, just enough to pay the bill, and Peter accepted it without hesitating. She looked at my tired face and asked me if I was okay to do this. Peter answered for me, saying it wouldn't be a problem. I wanted to tell them the truth, but I couldn't find the words to destroy their hope. I grabbed her hands tightly, and she smiled back at me immediately. Her color returned, and her eyes filled up with what I could only describe as life. Seeing as I was already in bad shape, it was too much for me, and I fell off the chair, letting go of the girl in the process. She started to fade back into the sickness as soon as we disconnected. "What are you doing?" Peter asked furiously. He bent down and pulled me back up, forcefully placing my hand back on the girl, who had gone from hopeful to frightened. "You're not going to let me down," he said. My hand was placed on top of hers, and Peter held me firmly. I could feel the bruises forming beneath his grips, but I was too weak to fight back. The lady started to heal, but as she did, something happened to Peter. Instead of the usual blisters and sores forming on my skin, they were moving over to Peter, where he stood. He gasped, but was unable to move, much less let go of my hand. For each passing second, he turned paler, and his hair started sloughing off alongside chunks of skin and flesh. Even his teeth started to fall apart as he desperately tried to let go of me, but he was stuck. By the time anyone realized what was happening, he fell over, dead before he hit the ground. The girl screamed in shock at what had just happened before her eyes, unable to believe that had been the plan. Peter, the man, had been all I had ever known growing up, and he was finally gone, leaving me with a mixture of relief and sadness. As far as abusive families goes, it was all I had. I looked at the girl. She seemed perfectly healthy like all the others, but something in her eyes appeared different, as if the disease had never existed within her in the first place. I knew it in my heart. I had truly cured someone for the first time in my life. It only came at the cost of another life. She was terrified, but I didn't care. I simply handed them their money back. I told them to leave and to never speak of this with anyone. I didn't need their money. Peter had enough stored away, enough to let me lead a comfortable life in peace. With my newfound freedom, the years flew by. I put a great deal of money into education, and before I knew it, I had become a nurse. I figured that would be the best way to use my abilities, taking away the pain of suffering people just at the end of station of life. These days, I usually stay late into the night when I know someone is about to die in unbearable pain. I wait until I'm all alone with the patients, and I take away their suffering. Better to let them die with a smile, even though I can't save all of them. On the rare occasion, though, I'll be stuck with someone not deserving of a second chance. Drunk drivers crashing into other cars, killing happy, innocent lives, or gang members hurting random pedestrians at some sick recruitment ceremony. These are my favorite patients. I have enough pull with the administrator to arrange which patient is kept in which bed, to a certain extent at least, and whenever possible, put the worst next to the best. It's the only way I can really save a life. Taking it from awful people and giving it to someone more deserving. No one suspects a thing. And though I'll never have a normal life, at least it'll be worthwhile if I can make sure I leave an impact. I've been pretty good at reading people, looking into their hearts, seeing what they've done with their lives. One day, you might find me at a hospital. You won't know who I am, but one thing is for certain. You won't have to suffer anymore. Okay, so that was the end of that story. I think it was a very good story. What do you guys think? Well, it looks like we have As the News Titans. Goat. What's up, buddy? Alrighty. I think the next story we're going to read is again by RichardSaxon. Gonna have a drink, and then we're gonna go ahead and start the story. So just give me a quick moment, and we'll get started. The story we're going to read tonight, this story at least, is called The Russians Dug the World's Deepest Hole. Now we know why. By RichardSaxon. Again, all of his information is in the description below. Please check him out and let him know how good his stories are. I think he definitely deserves it, as this last story was from him as well. The story before that was from, pull it up real quick, Verastahl. So I hope you all enjoy these authors. Please let the authors know that you enjoy their stories. How else am I going to get more patients? So, without further ado, let's get started. On the 24th of May, 1970, the Soviet Union started a project that would be known as the Kolar Super Deep Borehole. Although it has been long since abandoned, the hole still exists today and measures about 40,000 feet in depth. Be it for research or whatever claim have been told, the Kolar borehole is not the only time Russia dug further than they should have, and several holes can be found today, unprotected in the desolate Russian wilderness. The biggest mistake of my life is going down one of these holes. A year ago, my work took me to a small Russian fishing village located in Siberia. It's a tiny place, populated by no more than 200 people, and most of them fishermen or hunters. It wasn't the first time being a scientist had gotten me into some strange situations. I'm a geologist, which is, it's not important for the purpose of this story, but I have experience in search and rescue operations back home in the United States. My Russian language abilities were less than satisfactory, and considering only 2 people beside my crew spoke English in the village, it was a challenge to say the least. However, with the right spirit and willingness to share a bottle of vodka, they were some of the friendliest people I'd met in my entire life. I particularly enjoyed the company of the village's only police officer, Vadim, who happened to speak at least a basic level of English. His job consisted of escorting people home after they had a bit too much to drink, although he sometimes partook in the drinking rather than stopping it. Needless to say, we quickly became friends. We rather enjoyed ourselves in such a bizarre world cut off from civilization, but at least we did until the 9th month of our deployment. One of the locals' 7-year-old's daughter had gone missing. Her name was Daria, and she had been out playing with her friends around an old abandoned building widely believed to be a Soviet-era silo. The whole structure had been closed off for almost 40 years and forgotten, yet the children loved hanging out in the area. On that particular day, the silo was open. The doors were broken down, which revealed a large room full of ancient equipment and a large dark hole in the center. The hole measured about 50 feet in diameter, and the depth was unknown. There was a basic elevator platform in the center of the hole, something used for descending miners. All that could be seen was endless darkness reaching into the abyss, and Daria had fallen into it. I immediately knew in my heart that the fall had killed her. A fall that deep, even if the bottom was full of water, would be lethal. The other children insisted Daria had called out for help after falling into the hole, which gave out false hope to the terrified mother. It was the first time I'd seen Vadim efficiently work to put together a rescue operation. Calling for official aid so far out was a hopeless task. Even if they had sent help, they would arrive too late. Seeing as I had some experience in that field, alongside basic first aid, I volunteered as did one of my colleagues, Stanley. While the mechanics attempted to revive the old machinery, including the elevator, I attached a sinker to a line in hopes of measuring the depth. The line wasn't long enough to determine where the bottom was, even though the longest ropes combined measured almost 1,000 feet. After a couple of hours, mechanics announced that the elevator was ready, but they had found some sort of protective suits. According to the few documents found in the facility, the atmospheric pressure was quite high, and the temperatures reached up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I knew then we would retrieve nothing but the body of a little girl for the family to bury. "Goltov, ready?" Vadim asked us. The suits were poorly fitted to our slightly untrained figures and chafed in places I didn't know was possible. We entered the lift, which was protected by a rusty metal cage full of holes. We were given the only one-way walkie-talkie to communicate with the people on the surface, in addition to some old flashlights. "We're ready. Lower us down," Stanley said. The gears running the elevator platform started churning. Clunky sound echoed throughout the room down the hole. There was a small screen on the elevator with numbers signifying the depth. It was an excruciatingly slow process, no more than a foot per second. However, the change in atmosphere was imminent. We descended 100 feet. Darkness had already enveloped us. The weak flashlights we had brought along hardly provided any comfort. "You think this is dark? Wait until you see winter in the village," Vadim said in his usual dull humor. Me and Stanley both faked a chuckle. "Would you please check if the radio works, Vadim?" I asked. "It works. No worries," he responded. 500 feet. The walkie sounded for the first time since our descent almost 10 minutes ago. The Russian was heavy, and the static made it incomprehensible to a novice such as myself. "What was that, Vadim?" "Oh, they just asked how deep we are." "Shouldn't we be able to hear them talking? We're only 500 feet down," Stanley asked. "Yes, something strange here," Vadim said. Other than the electrical hum of the ancient elevator and the sound of Stanley nervously shifting his weight, we couldn't hear the clatter of people just above us. "Very strange," Vadim mumbled to himself. Something about Vadim seemed off. I had never seen him worried like that before. "Guys, is it getting really warm in here, or is it just me?" "Yeah, I'm sweating bullets already," I responded. 1,000 feet. "Pomogit!" A soft voice cried out from the depths below. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" "Someone called for help from below." "I hear nothing." I put a finger to my lips, gesturing for silence while listening intently. Then I heard the voice again. "Help!" Same voice, but slightly louder. "There it is again." "Yes, I heard it," Vadim said. "Hold on, they called for help?" "Yeah, you heard it too." "Of course, but it was in English." Wasn't too unusual for the children to pick up an English word or two while we were visiting, but this wasn't that. It didn't make sense for a young girl to know that world, not in a tiny Siberian village. Vadim called out for the voice, but no one responded. "Damn it! If we make this thing go any faster!" 4,000 feet. More than an hour had passed, and we couldn't see the bottom yet. It'd been quite some time since we heard the voice, and I had developed a throbbing headache from the heat. If someone had really called out from the bottom, we should have reached it already. "Guys, I see light!" Vadim announced. "What are you talking about?" "Light! At the bottom, look!" He frantically jumped up and down while pointing towards the darkness below. "There's nothing there, Vadim," Stanley said. "How can you not see? It's so bright." I glanced over at Stanley in confusion. My first thought was that Vadim was going crazy due to the heat and darkness. 5,000 feet. None of us had said a single word since Vadim told us about the light. Our moods were descending much faster than the elevator. On top of that, my headache was almost killing me. Out of nowhere, the elevator stopped, shaking violently in the process. It knocked me straight to the floor, and I was out in an instant. A few seconds passed while I came back to it, and I saw Stanley lying unmoving next to me. Vadim, however, was nowhere to be found. "Stan, you all right?" I shook his shoulder. He grunted as he sat back up. "What the hell just happened?" "I don't know. Vadim's gone." "What? Where'd he go?" "I don't know. He just vanished." We looked around. There's no way out of the elevator. Although there were a few holes in the metal cage surrounding us, it would be impossible for a large man such as Vadim to get through. "Hey, I found the walkie," Stanley said. "Try calling the surface." He called for help, but static was the only response. We tried to call out for Dean, but he was far gone. The elevator started descending again. "Fuck this! Let's go back up!" Stanley pleaded. I clicked a few buttons on the panel. "How?" The controls are broken. Only the ones on the surface work." He started screaming for the people at the top to bring us back, but we both know there was no way they could hear us all the way down here. 10,000 feet deep. It had taken more than 4 hours to get that deep, the heat getting worse for each foot descended. I'd already passed out a couple times from dehydration, despite having brought ample amount of water. "Why haven't they brought us back up yet?" Stanley asked with a weak voice. He was quite a bit older than myself, so he was rapidly deteriorating from the heat. "I don't know. Is it even possible to be this far down?" Stanley didn't respond. He'd fallen unconscious, but I lacked the energy to wake him up. I was pass out for the nth time myself. I was only jolted back into consciousness with what sounded like singing. It's the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. In Russian, and I didn't understand what it was about, but it was so serene, so pure. "Stan," I called out with my fading voice. "Can you hear that?" "Who's singing?" he mumbled, half asleep. A light appeared in the depths, and the singing got louder. "I see it! The light!" I said. The elevator stopped once more. Stan was gone, just like Vadim had vanished into thin air, but the light remained. Beautiful, warm light. It started moving towards me, and the closer it got, the more at peace I felt. The light ascended until I saw nothing but the brightness surrounding me. And then there was nothing. I woke up in the hospital 1 week later. I'd been found in the middle of a forest in eastern Russia, by a pair of hunters. I had no documentation or proof of who I was, and as they claimed, my story didn't add up. No such hole existed according to public records, which wasn't much of a surprise, but when I dug deeper, I realized the village I had stayed in for the better part of a year wasn't even on the map. The ordeal had taken a toll on my mind, leaving several gaps in my memory, though I could recall a few phone numbers for my colleagues. When I called them, their numbers were all disconnected or reached completely unrelated people. After a lengthy investigation, I was allowed to travel back to the United States on the emergency travel document. My fingerprints matched some documentation of my of my existence, which helped. Not criminal records, mind you. When I returned home, I discovered my house was owned by someone else and had been for at least 10 years. It took me a long time to figure out what had happened. But some changes were too big to be a horrible coincidence. Putting aside the personal changes I've experienced here, even world history doesn't match what I remember studying. Geography is vastly different. Heck, there's even an entire continent missing from the map. Denial is a powerful tool. It took me months to come to terms with a very simple yet complicated fact. This is not the world I belong to. And that was the end. All right. And we have another story to do in a minute here. This one is by the author Jgrupe. You guys have heard several of his stories, and they're pretty darn good, so I hope you do enjoy them. Bear a moment. Once this story's over, we'll be calling it a night. So I do apologize if you think it's a little too short. Still trying to make sure we take care of all the patients and deal with all those who keep getting in and not supposed to be. So I do need to make sure I have plenty of time to review all of my security information and the cameras and all of that. The title of this story is I Won a Cursed Lottery. From the moment I bought the lottery ticket, it didn't feel right. I had never spent money on lottery tickets and thought they were a waste of money, but a sign on the street corner caught my eye when I was walking home from work. Community lottery. Money raised goes to a good cause. Current jackpot, 2.34 million. I was intrigued for some reason. It was a lot of money, and I didn't imagine a lot of people were playing since it looked like a small operation. I went inside, and a small man with a fine mustache stood behind the counter. The store looked a little rough inside. Paint was peeling from the walls, and the shelves were half bare. It smelled a bit like mildew and spoiled meat. The shopkeeper smiled at me warmly as I walked up to the counter, a light dancing in his eyes behind his round spectacles. He wore a distinctive black suit with gold cuffs and a collar. Welcome. What can I do for you?" he said in a friendly tone. "I saw your sign outside, and I wanted to buy a few tickets for the lottery," I said. Of course. All the money goes to a good cause. $2 for one, $5 for three, $10 gets you 7 tickets. How many you want?" He's pulling out a crisp stack of tickets. Their faces appeared to have been inked by hand, but that wasn't possible considering the size of the jackpot, I thought. They had to have been stamped. Yeah, each one looked unique and different. They weren't numbered. They looked like Rorschach tests, each with a unique black blotch of ink. I was feeling lucky. I told him I would take as many as $50 would get me. There wasn't a price break past $10, so I ended up with 35 tickets. I flipped through them, amazed at how different they each were. "Good luck. Remember, all the money raised goes to a good cause." Man's face was bemused. His mouth turned up the corners into a little smile. "Anything I should know? How do I find out if I won?" asked the man. His brow wrinkled. His face looked annoyed by this question. I've never played the lottery before. It seems a bit strange. Someone will tell you if you win. Don't worry, he said cryptically. I didn't understand how they would find me, but he refused to take any of my information. I left the store feeling like I had been ripped off. $50 for a handful of black and white tickets with cool designs on them didn't seem like a very good deal. Was it experiencing buyer's remorse for the first time in years as I walked home? I was usually very frugal. Couldn't help but wonder what had gotten into me. A week later, someone came to my door. It was another old man wearing the same black suit trimmed with gold as the shopkeeper. He was holding a ticket with a black abstract pattern on it, like Rorschach test. He didn't say a word, just held up the piece of paper and stood there smiling. Black blotch looked like a devious little monkey, and I recognized it immediately. I ran upstairs excited and grabbed the stack of tickets, shuffled through them, and found the one that matched. I made a high-pitched yell of excitement. I was rich! I waved the ticket with a monkey ink blotch on it above my head and danced. I never won anything before in my life. I just couldn't believe it. I brought the whole stack of tickets down with me just in case, but kept the monkey one separate. I showed it to him, and he nodded, smiling his head. He took out a check from his pocket and handed it to me with a flourish, then began to walk away. It was a check for $2,200. Furious, I tried to contain my anger. I ran in front of the man, and cut off his hasty escape. He looked surprised. I told him the sign said the prize was over $2 million. $2,200 was a long way for that. Money goes to a good cause. You are not a good cause. You take $2,200 and be happy, the man said. I couldn't believe my ears. His smile had faded, and he looked very serious now, as if I had broken some unspoken contract. I thought of a 50-50 draw at the Stag and Doe, or at charity events where the winner was expected to donate their winnings to the cause, but was that what this was? I thought of the man's words. All money raised goes to a good cause. I hadn't even bothered to ask the name of the charity. Listen, if you try to screw me here, I'll come after you guys for false advertising. See what you're trying to pull. I won this thing, fair and square. Now give me what's mine, I told him, gritting my teeth. I'd never been a greedy person, but the idea of $2 million that was rightfully mine being taken from me rubbed me the wrong way and brought out a very bad side of me. I had already mentally begun to spend the money and felt robbed and cheated. If I wanted to give some of it to their charity, that was my decision to make. Greedy and unfamiliar little monster's voice said inside my head. He furrowed his brow. His eyes looked sad for a second, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out another check. He put the other one away and handed me this one instead. The amount written on it was $2,234,423. $2,234,423. I jumped up and down, giddy with delight. When I opened my eyes again, the man was gone. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought I would only get half that amount at the very most after some negotiating. No one contacted me to ask if I wanted to have my picture taken with a big cardboard check. I was a bit disappointed, but I decided I wouldn't let it bother me. I had over $2 million to spend on whatever I wanted. No one called to ask me to donate a portion of the organization's charitable cause, but I assumed they would send something by mail. First things first, I thought, and called my job. I quit without notice, playing punk rock on my laptop as I did so and singing, "Take this job and shove it," as loud as the music that played in my ear. I sang the lyrics to my manager letting him know I ain't working there no more. My boss was furious with him, but I was just hung up on him. Holiday in Cambodia came up on the play next, and I listened furiously jovial tones of Jello Biafra with a big smile on my face as I lay on the couch. It felt good to be in charge of my own destiny for once. Or so I thought. I went to the bank to deposit the check. After talking to managers for a while, they made a phone call and confirmed that the check was real. Probably should have checked that in the first before quitting. They told me it would take a little while to clear and I would have to wait a week or two to spend any money. I sat around my apartment for a couple of weeks playing video games and watching old movies and enjoying the unemployed lifestyles of the soon-to-be rich and famous. Finally, the bank called and said I could play with my cash. The manager tried to tell me something else, but I hung up on him before he could waste any more of my time. The guy's voice was dry and boring, and suddenly I had no attention span for boring. After a lifetime of normality, I was ready to have some fun. I went to the BMW dealership first. I had always wanted one and decided I would treat myself to an M5. They obliged, and I burnt rubber out of the car lot watching their surprised faces as I drove away. The car had a lot of torque and was tough to control due to my lack of experience with high-performance vehicles. I didn't let that bother me, though, and gunned it down the main roads until cops pulled me over and gave me a hefty speeding ticket. The price of it didn't bother me, but the points against my license did. I already had a couple of recent speeding tickets from prior infractions, and the cop told me the points against my license. I would go in front of the judge to plead my case of why I should keep my license. I bit my tongue and tried not to scream at him. My license would be revoked for up to 6 months if the judge decided I didn't need it that bad or wasn't remorseful enough. I tried not to worry about it too much, but 2 weeks later, my license was revoked. The judge hadn't liked my attitude, apparently. To get the bad taste of that experience out of my mouth, I contacted a real estate agent. I was in the market for a house, I told her. Something big, with a pool, the greedy little voice inside of me said. She showed me a few options, and I settled on the nicest one of the bunch. It cost a cool $1 million, but it was worth it. I spent another day shopping and filled the house with top-of-the-line electronics and comfortable leather furniture, a pool table, a Pac-Man vintage tabletop game, and outfitted the back deck with a gigantic Weber barbecue with a buttload of BTUs. After all that shopping, I gave some money to friends and family who began to hound me for cash to help them pay down debts and replace aging and broken-down vehicles. They'd always been good to me, so I felt guilty saying no. I had some student loan debt, so I wiped that out with a sigh of relief as well. I had a terrible feeling when I logged into my bank account and realized how much I had spent. I knew I was no longer a millionaire, but was surprised to see the balance was $655,573.24. I had spent 2/3 of the money in 3 weeks. But at least I had a sweet ride and a great house to show for it, I thought. I meant a mental tally of all the things I'd purchased, and I tried to make myself feel better, but I couldn't. I felt empty and hollow inside suddenly. I couldn't understand the feeling and tried desperately to get rid of it. I took a trip to Hawaii. I got sick the day I arrived with a virus the doctors couldn't figure out. My travel insurance covered the hospital bills for the most part, but the vacation was a bust. I came home a month later after spending all that time in the hospital. I hadn't even gone to a beach while I was on my trip. I was so sick I couldn't spend more than 10 minutes out of bed. Wounds and bed sores developed all over me. My skin became paper thin from the steroids the doctors prescribed to try to fight the illness. I got a cut on my foot the day I got home, and it stubbornly refused to heal. It wouldn't even stop bleeding and quickly became infected. I ended up in the hospital again. This time in isolation room as my wound picked up another infection. Nosocomial and resistant to antibiotics. Perfect, I thought. Just one more thing. What else could go wrong? Started to regret not just keeping the check for $2,200. I was beginning to get the feeling my life perhaps would have been better if I had. This all felt like a punishment. The greedy voice inside me told me I was wrong, but I didn't trust it. My friends and family abandoned me and stopped visiting. I had become stingy with my remaining money, and they resented me for it. They said I had changed, that I was greedy and indifferent to them. All I wanted was to keep some of the wealth as a nest egg, I told them. Was that so bad? I was finally discharged from the hospital. I'd lost 70 pounds and was emaciated and weak. I could barely walk, and just getting out of bed exhausted me. When I got home, I tried to enjoy my big house, but it was too large for me to get around now that I was deconditioned from my long hospital day. I had to get a nurse and a personal support worker to help me bathe and do housework. I had no strength left suddenly and felt used up and hopeless. I was afraid to look at my bank account now. The money in there was no good. It was toxic. One night, laying in bed, restless as I wiggled and squirmed, trying to find a way to ignore the pain from the bed sore on my coccyx, I decided I should give the money back. Something told me that was the only way to fix things. I sold the house and brought the BMW back to the dealership. After everything else of value, I ended up with around $1.8 million back into my bank account. I felt I needed to return the rest as well, but was in no state to do any physical labor in order to make some money. It'd probably take 20 years to save up the amount I needed to pay it all back. I prayed that the man in black and gold would forgive me and return my life to normal somehow. Called each member of my family and told them more or less what I planned to do, fudging the details only slightly. I said I had planned to give all the money to charity. I thought they would be greedy, but everyone told me I was making the right decision. They said the money had changed me, and certainly not for the better. I made my way back to the little shop the next morning with the help of my PSW. He drove me there and helped me inside of my wheelchair. The man at the counter was not the same, and my heart dropped immediately. He was dressed in a white t-shirt that said Florida on it and blue jeans. He spoke in a twangy southern drawl, and when I asked about the lottery, he said he had no clue what I was talking about. "Well, you got all kinds of scratchers, if that's what you're after," he said, pulling out the scratch and win tickets from beneath the plastic countertop. I shook my head and thanked him for his time. We left the shop, and I realized I had no clue what to do next. I had to give the money back, but how would I find the men in black suits with gold trim? I stopped a woman walking by and asked if she knew the people who owned the shop before, the ones who ran the community lottery. The woman shrugged and said she'd lived there for years but never heard such a thing. I looked around and saw the street looked worse than it had the day I bought the ticket a couple months before. The people looked sadder. The buildings were dirtier and looked in disrepair. Cars on the street belched thick gray smoke and rattled over potholes. Homeless people clustered on a corner where the little shanty was erected. Windows were boarded up, and abandoned storefront windows were smashed and left unrepaired. The broken glass lay scattered on the sidewalk. I went home, anxious and upset. I needed to find the men in the black suits with the gold trim. It was the only way to get my life back, I thought. In my motel room that night, I lay in bed, cold and scared. It didn't seem how many blankets I put on, I could never seem to stay warm. I never put back any of the weight I had lost, and in fact lost more every week. I couldn't keep food down and had never-ending nausea. I thought I had cancer, but all the tests came back negative at the hospital when I was there. Still, it felt like something horrible was festering and growing inside of me. A greedy little monster was always there in my head, but I now ignored him and his awful desires. Still, he whispered to me constantly, "The greedy thing inside you will eat you up," said a voice from the shadows in the corner of my dark room. The clock on my bedside table said 3:23 a.m. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out as a strangled whisper. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The light danced in the eyes of the man in the shadows, but although there was no light in the room to be reflected, I saw him step forward out of the darkness. His smile was bemused, still barely visible. "You should have kept your winnings when they were offered," he said. "I'm sorry," I managed, tears streaming down my face. "What can I do? I want to give it back. Let me give it back." "You have all of it?" he asked with a sly and knowing look in his eyes that said he knew I didn't. "I tried. But I have most of it, over 1,800,000. Please take it back. I don't want it." My words sounded pathetic to my own ears, but I didn't care. I only hoped he would. Except he didn't. "You must give it all back. The hoard must be whole to tip back the scales so they rest even once again," he said. "How? Just tell me what to do. I'll do it." I pleaded with him desperately. "There are many ways to make $1. Find one of them, then do it again and again until it's whole again." His face looked a little gleeful. The bastard was enjoying this. "I can't. Don't you understand? It's impossible. I'll die before I make even $10. I was angry, but tried to plead once more with him. "There must be some other way. I'll do anything. My voice came out in a whisper. "Well," the man said, playing with the corners of his fine mustache, "you have one other option, although you may not like it." The next day, I went to the address where the man told me to go. I walked in and they gave me a hospital gown, although this was not a hospital. I was directed to lie flat on the cold steel table and told the doctors would be in shortly. The man who came in was wearing black scrubs with gold trim. He introduced himself as Dr. Gold. An assistant came in next, an older woman in glasses, dressed the same. She said her name was Nurse Black. They told me what they would be done, and I said that would be fine. Whatever I had to do to get my life back, I would do it. They explained they no longer had an anesthesiologist. He had paid his debt, so I would be awake for the procedure. They scrubbed large swaths of my body with a disinfectant that had turned my skin pink. Then they began to cut. Scalpel left a red trail of blossoming blood wherever it went, and soon the stuff was everywhere. Nurse Black mopped it up calmly with clean towels, wiping the sweat from Dr. Gold's brow every so often. I screamed and wept. I gnashed my teeth and pounded my fists into the hard steel table as they reached into my body, severing arteries and veins and pulling out slippery blood-soaked organs which shone like rubies in the bright light of the overhead lamp. I passed out after they cut off a portion of my lung, when I felt I could suddenly no longer breathe. The doctor looked around with wide eyes for a moment, as if he had made a bad mistake. I woke up once more and wish I hadn't. What I saw should not have been seen. The price of my organs on the black market didn't quite cover the costs of my mistake, Dr. Gold said as my eyes fluttered open. His words were fading in and out. I nodded my head when he asked me a question, though I didn't understand it. He handed me a pen, and I took it in my shaking hand. I remember signing something, but I didn't read what it said. I wish I could tell you things worked out for me. I really do, and maybe they will someday. I only wish they told me what crappy weight people pay for black market organs. I would rather have had my kidney and left eye than $20,000 wiped from my debt. Still have to pay the rest back in labor anyways. At least they pulled that little monster out of me, kicking and screaming. An tiny, inky black monkey made of greed, hate, screeching and howling as it dug its claws into my belly in a futile attempt to stay inside me, to destroy me. It's the last thing I saw before the world went dark. Maybe one day I'll get to work behind a counter somewhere, selling tickets. But for now, I'm only tasked with inking them. Each blotch of ink has to be distinctive and different, and there's thousands, millions of tickets to make. They don't give us breaks either. We live at our desks, receiving whips to the back from a cat of nine tails when we fall asleep or slow down. They have IVs hanging down from the ceiling full of vitamins and amphetamines, which infuse into us all day as we hunch over our desks. I'm told the cost of the fluids and amphetamines are added to our debt every day, and that just keeps growing and growing and growing. But that's just a rumor. No one gets to see their balance. People disappear sometimes, and we hope they paid their debt and didn't just die of exhaustion. I look ahead and see rows of people puttering away at their desks, fading into the distance. This warehouse, or whatever it is, it's enormous. There's thousands of us here, all dressed in black, with cold cuffs and collars. Someone smuggled in this phone the other day. We've been discreetly passing it around, making fruitless efforts to contact the outside world. So I decided to use it to tell you my story and to plead with you, to beg you, please, send money. And that is the end of that story. And that will be the end of our stream this evening. In case you missed any part of the stream or showed up late, I do leave the streams up on my channel. You can also direct friends and family to listen to them in case they're unable to make our visiting hours. We finally reached the end of our time together this evening. Visiting hours are now over, and while I hope to see you all here again, perhaps I can convince you to be permanent residents at the asylum. I am Beyond 5150, and I wish you all wonderful nightmares. Good night, sleep well, and just ignore the screams.